Millionaire saw a little girl's empty lunchbox. What he found inside broke his heart. The crimson Ferrari screeched to a halt outside Lincoln Elementary, its engine purring like a predator as parents in minivans stared through their windows. Vincent Corleone stepped out, his $1,000 Italian shoes clicking against cracked asphalt that had seen better decades. He wasn't supposed to be here. Hell, he'd never set foot in a public school in his life. But here he was, clutching a manila envelope that could change everything. Hey there, amazing viewers. Welcome back to our channel, where real stories touch real hearts. I'm so glad you're here with me today. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Are you cozy at home, maybe taking a break at work, or perhaps listening while you're out and about? And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button, because trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next in this incredible story. Vincent's jaw clenched as he approached the school's entrance. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like dying insects, casting harsh shadows across linoleum floors that had been mopped with industrial disinfectant. Everything here screamed budget cuts and broken dreams, the complete opposite of the marble-floored private academies where he'd written donation checks just for the tax write-offs. He was here for one reason: damage control. 3 days ago, his company's construction crew had accidentally damaged the school's playground equipment during a nearby project. The principal had called, voice tight with barely contained fury, demanding he see firsthand what his reckless expansion had cost the children. Vincent had planned to send his assistant with a check and a legal waiver. But something in that woman's voice, raw, protective, desperate, had gotten under his skin. Now, walking these halls that reeked of cafeteria mystery meat and childhood anxiety, he wondered what the hell he'd gotten himself into. The lunch bell rang like a fire alarm, and suddenly the corridors exploded with chaos. Children poured from classrooms like water through a broken dam, their voices creating a symphony of pure, unfiltered life that made Vincent's chest tighten unexpectedly. When was the last time he'd heard genuine laughter? When was the last time anything had felt this real? He followed the stream of small bodies toward the cafeteria, his designer suit making him stick out like a diamond in a coal mine. Kids pointed and whispered, their eyes wide with curiosity and suspicion. Some had never seen a man in a suit that cost more than their parents made in 3 months. The cafeteria hit him like a physical blow. The smell of processed food and industrial cleaning supplies mixed with something else, something that made his throat close up. It was the scent of childhood, of innocence, of a world he'd forgotten existed beyond his penthouse walls and boardroom battles. And that's when he saw her. In the far corner, away from the chaos of lunch trades and playground politics, sat a little girl who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail that had seen better days, secured with a rubber band instead of the designer hair accessories his business partner's daughter wore. Her clothes were clean but worn, the kind of hand-me-downs that spoke of a family stretching every dollar until it screamed. But it wasn't her appearance that stopped Vincent cold. It was the way she sat, perfectly still, perfectly alone, her small hands folded in her lap as she stared down at the empty lunchbox in front of her with an expression that belonged to someone 50 years older. Vincent had seen that look before. In mirrors, in boardrooms, in the faces of people who had learned too young that the world was a place where you survived alone or you didn't survive at all. The little girl, he could see her name tag read Emma, opened her lunchbox with the careful precision of someone performing a sacred ritual. Vincent expected to see the usual elementary school fare, a sandwich, maybe some crackers, a juice box. Instead, the lunchbox was completely empty except for a single folded piece of paper. Something twisted in Vincent's chest as he watched Emma unfold that paper with trembling fingers. Her lips moved silently as she read whatever was written there. And then, God help him, a single tear rolled down her cheek before she quickly wiped it away and looked around to make sure no one had seen. But Vincent had seen, and in that moment, something inside him that had been frozen for 37 years began to crack. He found himself moving toward her table before his brain could catch up with his feet. This wasn't his problem. This wasn't his world. He was here to write a check and leave, not to get involved in some kid's lunch situation. But his legs kept carrying him forward, drawn by an invisible force he couldn't name and couldn't fight. "Excuse me," he said softly, his voice rougher than he'd intended. Emma's head snapped up, her eyes wide with the kind of startled fear that made Vincent's heart clench. Up close, he could see she had her mother's eyes, deep brown and far too wise for someone who should still believe in fairy tales. "I'm sorry," she whispered, quickly closing the lunchbox. "I wasn't doing anything wrong." The fact that her first instinct was to apologize hit Vincent like a sledgehammer to the chest. When was the last time he'd apologized for anything? When was the last time he'd felt the need to? "You're not in trouble," he said, crouching down so he was at her eye level. I noticed you sitting alone. Are you waiting for someone?" Emma shook her head, her small fingers clutching the lunchbox like a lifeline. "No, sir. I always sit here. Always." The word echoed in Vincent's mind like a death knell. How many days had this little girl sat in this corner, alone with whatever was in that lunchbox that made her cry? "What's your name?" he asked, though he'd already seen her name tag. "Emma Watson," she said quietly. "Are you here about the playground?" "Some of the kids said a rich man was coming to see what got broken." Vincent's throat tightened. Even the children knew why he was here. Even they understood that he was the kind of man who only showed up when something needed fixing or paying for. Something like that, he said. "Emma, can I ask you something? And you can tell me it's none of my business if you want." She nodded, her eyes never leaving his face. "What's in your lunchbox?" The question hung in the air between them like a loaded gun. Emma's face went through a dozen emotions in the span of a heartbeat. Fear, shame, defiance, and finally, a kind of resigned sadness that no child should ever have to carry. "Nothing," she whispered. "There's nothing in my lunchbox." But Vincent had seen her reading something. I had seen the tears, had seen the way she held that piece of paper like it contained the secrets of the universe. "Emma," he said gently, "would you mind if I looked?" For a moment, he thought she was going to refuse. Her small hands tightened on the lunchbox, and he could see the war playing out behind her eyes. Trust versus self-preservation. Hope versus experience. Finally, with the kind of courage that humbled him, Emma Watson opened her lunchbox and handed him the folded piece of paper. Vincent's hands shook as he unfolded it, and what he saw there didn't just break his heart. It shattered his entire world. What did Vincent find in that piece of paper that changed everything? The answer will shock you, and I promise you're not prepared for what comes next. But before we continue, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had a moment that completely changed your perspective on life? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe because this story is just getting started, and you won't want to miss a single moment of what happens next. The handwriting was shaky, the kind that comes from small fingers still learning to form letters. But the words were clear enough to stop Vincent's heart. "Dear Mommy, today is day 127 since you went to heaven. I'm still counting like you told me to. Mrs. Peterson says I'm the bravest girl in second grade, but I don't feel brave. I feel scared all the time. Tommy cried again last night, and I didn't know what to tell him. Sarah keeps asking when you're coming home, and I keep lying and saying soon. I'm sorry for lying, but I don't know what else to do. I pretend there's food in my lunchbox, so the other kids don't ask questions. I tell them I already ate or that I'm not hungry. I'm getting really good at pretending, Mommy. You'd be proud of how good I am at pretending everything is okay. I love you forever and always. Emma. P.S. I'm trying to be strong like you said, but it's really hard." Vincent's vision blurred as he read the letter a second time, then a third. Each word was a knife to his chest, each sentence a revelation that made him question everything he thought he knew about the world. This wasn't just about a forgotten lunch. This was about a little girl who had lost everything and was somehow still standing, still fighting, still protecting her siblings with a strength that put his own to shame. "Emma," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "how long has it been since you've eaten lunch?" She looked down at her hands, her cheeks flushing with shame. "I eat breakfast at school, the free program, and dinner when I get home. Mrs. Chan from next door brings us groceries sometimes. But lunch costs money we don't have," Emma said simply, as if she were discussing the weather instead of her own starvation. "And I can't let the school know, because then they might call the people who take kids away from their families. Tommy and Sarah need me." Vincent felt something crack open inside his chest, something that had been sealed shut since he was not much older than Emma herself. He remembered being 12 years old, standing in a courtroom while strangers decided his fate after his own parents died in a car accident. He remembered the foster homes, the feeling of being unwanted, The way he'd learned to build walls so high that nothing could hurt him again. But this little girl, this brave, incredible little girl, was choosing love over safety, sacrifice over self-preservation. She was everything he'd forgotten how to be. "Emma, where's your father?" he asked gently. "He left when Mommy got sick," she said matter-of-factly. "Said he couldn't handle watching her die. Mommy said some people just aren't built for the hard parts of love." The casual way she delivered this devastating information hit Vincent like a physical blow. How many 8-year-olds had to develop that kind of philosophical understanding of abandonment? How many children had to become adults before they'd even lost their baby teeth? "And your siblings?" "Tommy and Sarah." Emma's face lit up for the first time since he'd sat down, and Vincent saw a glimpse of the child she should have been allowed to be. "Tommy's 5 and Sarah's 3. They're at the daycare center while I'm at school. Mrs. Rodriguez watches them for free because she knew Mommy from church. Everyone's been really nice, but—" She trailed off, her smile fading. But nice doesn't pay rent, and nice doesn't buy groceries, and nice doesn't make the scary letters from the bank stop coming." Emma's voice was steady, but Vincent could see the weight of the world pressing down on her small shoulders. "I heard Mrs. Chun talking to Mrs. Rodriguez about calling social services. They think I don't understand what that means, but I do. It means they'll split us up, put us in different homes with different families." Vincent's hands clenched into fists. The idea of this family being torn apart, of Emma losing the siblings she was sacrificing everything to protect, made him want to punch something. Or someone. Preferably the father who had walked away when his family needed him most. "That's not going to happen," he said, the words coming out with more force than he'd intended. Emma looked at him with those two wise eyes. "You can't promise that, mister. You don't even know me." She was right, of course. He didn't know her. But in the span of 10 minutes, this little girl had shown him more courage, more love, more pure human decency than he'd encountered in years of boardroom meetings and charity galas. She'd reminded him of something he'd buried so deep he'd forgotten it existed. The part of him that still believed in protecting the innocent, in fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. "My name is Vincent," he said. "Vincent Corleone. And you're right. I don't know you yet. But I'd like to, if you'll let me." Emma studied his face with the intensity of someone who'd learned early that adults couldn't always be trusted. Why? It was a fair question. Why was he here? Why'd he care? 24 hours ago, if someone had told him he'd be sitting in a school cafeteria having his heart broken by a second grader, he'd have laughed them out of the room. "Because," he said slowly, trying to find words for feelings he'd spent decades avoiding, "I think maybe you and I understand each other. I think maybe we've both learned how to be strong when we didn't have any other choice." Something flickered in Emma's eyes. Recognition, maybe, or hope. "Were you alone when you were little too?" The question hit him like a sucker punch. Vincent had spent 30 years building an empire, accumulating wealth and power and influence, all in service of making sure he'd never be that helpless 12-year-old boy again. But sitting here with Emma, all of that seemed suddenly meaningless. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I was alone too." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two souls who'd found each other across an impossible divide of age and circumstance and social class. Around them, the cafeteria buzzed with the normal chaos of childhood, kids trading snacks, arguing over playground rules, laughing at jokes only they understood. But in their corner, Vincent and Emma existed in a bubble of shared understanding. "Mr. Vincent," Emma said finally. "Just Vincent is fine." "Vincent, do you think my mommy can see me from heaven?" The question nearly undid him. Vincent had stopped believing in heaven, in God, in anything beyond the cold mathematics of profit and loss, a long time ago. But looking at this little girl who'd lost everything and still found ways to hope, he desperately wanted to believe again. "I think," he said carefully, "that if there is a heaven, your mommy is watching you every single day. And I think she's incredibly proud of how brave and strong and loving you are." Emma smiled then, a real smile that transformed her entire face and made Vincent's chest tight with emotions he couldn't name. "I hope so," she said. "I really hope so." The lunch bell rang, signaling the end of the period, and kids began clearing their tables and heading back to class. Emma carefully folded her letter and placed it back in the empty lunchbox, her movements reverent and precise. "Emma," Vincent said as she stood to leave, Would it be okay if I came back tomorrow? Maybe we could have lunch together. She looked at him with surprise and something that might have been joy. You want to do that? I'd like that very much. Okay, she said shyly. But I should warn you, I don't have much to share. Vincent smiled, and for the first time in years, it felt genuine. Don't worry about that. I'll bring enough for both of us. As Emma walked away, her empty lunchbox clutched in her small hands, Vincent remained seated at the plastic table, his mind reeling. He'd come here to write a check and leave. Instead, he found something he hadn't even known he was looking for, a purpose that had nothing to do with profit margins and everything to do with the kind of person he'd forgotten he could be. But as he watched Emma disappear into the crowd of children, a cold realization settled in his stomach. This wasn't just about lunch money or playground equipment. This was about a family on the verge of being destroyed, about a little girl carrying burdens that would break most adults, about a system that was failing the people who needed it most. And Vincent Corleone, for all his wealth and power, had no idea how to fix any of it. But he was damn sure going to try. Vincent's world has been turned upside down by one brave little girl, but he has no idea what he's truly gotten himself into. The challenges ahead will test everything he thinks he knows about family, sacrifice, and what it really means to be strong. What do you think Vincent should do next? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I love hearing your perspectives on these incredible stories. Vincent spent the rest of that day in a haze, his mind replaying Emma's letter over and over until the words were burned into his memory. He'd returned to his downtown office, 43 floors of glass and steel that suddenly felt like a prison, but found himself unable to concentrate on quarterly reports or merger negotiations. Every time he tried to focus on spreadsheets, he saw Emma's face. Every time his assistant brought him documents to sign, he heard her small voice saying, "Nice doesn't pay rent." By 6 p.m., he'd made a decision that would have shocked anyone who knew him. He was going grocery shopping. Vincent Corleone hadn't set foot in a grocery store in 15 years. His housekeeper handled all domestic necessities, and when he ate at home, which was rare, it was usually something delivered from one of the city's finest restaurants. But here he was, standing in the fluorescent-lit aisles of Savamart, completely out of his element and determined to figure out what an 8-year-old girl might want for lunch. The store was a revelation. Families moved through the aisles with practiced efficiency, mothers checking coupons while children begged for sugary cereals, fathers pushing carts loaded with the mundane necessities of daily life. Vincent watched them with the fascination of an anthropologist studying an alien culture. When was the last time he'd been surrounded by such normalcy? He found himself in the lunch meat section, staring at packages of turkey and ham with the intensity of someone trying to decode ancient hieroglyphics. Did kids like mustard? Was white bread better than wheat? Should he get juice boxes or water bottles? First time shopping for school lunches. Vincent turned to find a woman about his age watching him with an amused smile. She was pretty in an understated way, with laugh lines around her eyes and flour dusting the sleeve of her cardigan. Her cart was filled with the organized chaos of family life: milk, bread, fresh fruit, and what appeared to be ingredients for homemade cookies. Is it that obvious? Vincent asked, surprised to find himself smiling back. The deer-in-headlights expression gave it away. She said with a laugh, "I'm Sarah Connor, by the way, and you look like a man who's never had to choose between name brand and store-brand peanut butter." Vincent Corleone, and you're absolutely right. He gestured helplessly at the wall of sandwich options. "I'm trying to figure out what to pack for lunch for a friend. A young friend." Sarah's expression softened. "How old?" "8. Ah, the golden age of very specific food preferences and mysterious dislikes." Sarah moved closer, her voice taking on the tone of someone sharing classified information. "Here's the secret. Keep it simple. Turkey and cheese on white bread, cut diagonally, never straight across. That's apparently a cardinal sin. Apple slices with a little lemon juice, so they don't turn brown. A small bag of chips, the individual size, not the big bag, because sharing is apparently not required at lunch. And a juice box, but make sure it's the kind with the bendy straw." Vincent found himself hanging on every word. Bendy straw? Trust me on this one. The bendy straw is crucial. Sarah paused, studying his face with curious eyes. "Can I ask what prompted this sudden interest in lunch preparation? You don't strike me as the PDA type." Vincent hesitated. How could he explain that 12 hours ago, he'd been a different person entirely? That a little girl's empty lunchbox had somehow cracked open something inside him that he'd thought was permanently sealed? I met someone today, he said finally. Someone who reminded me that there are more important things than quarterly profits. Sarah's smile was warm and knowing. One of those life-changing encounters. I had one of those myself about 10 years ago. Really? I was a high-powered attorney, working 80-hour weeks, living on takeout and ambition. Then I volunteered to help with my nephew's school fundraiser and met this teacher who was spending her own money to buy supplies for her classroom. She was making maybe a tenth of what I made, but she was changing lives every single day while I was just making rich people richer. Vincent felt a jolt of recognition. What did you do? I quit the law firm, went back to school, and became a teacher myself. Best decision I ever made. Sarah's eyes sparkled with mischief, though my bank account would probably disagree. Do you ever regret it? Never. Money can't buy the feeling you get when you help a child discover they're capable of more than they ever imagined. She paused, then added quietly, "It sounds like you might be discovering that yourself." Before Vincent could respond, Sarah's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her face immediately shifted to concern. "I'm sorry, I have to take this," she said, stepping away. "Hello, Mrs. Rodriguez? Slow down, what's wrong?" Vincent couldn't help but overhear as Sarah's voice grew increasingly alarmed. "What do you mean they're at the school? Tonight? But that's not. No, don't let them take the children anywhere until I get there. I'm on my way." She hung up and turned to Vincent, her face pale. "I'm sorry, I have to go. There's an emergency at the school." "What kind of emergency?" Sarah hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "You said you met someone today who changed your perspective. Was it by any chance a little girl named Emma Watson?" Vincent's blood turned to ice. "How did you know that?" "Because I'm her teacher, and Child Protective Services just showed up at the school. Someone called in a report about 3 children living alone without adequate supervision." Sarah's voice was tight, with barely controlled panic. "They're going to take Emma and her siblings into custody tonight." The grocery store seemed to tilt around Vincent. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not when he just found, what? Purpose? Hope? A reason to care about something beyond his own success? "I'm coming with you," he said, abandoning his cart in the middle of the aisle. "You don't understand," Sarah said as they hurried toward the exit. "Once CPS gets involved, once they decide a situation is unsafe, it's almost impossible to reverse. Those children could be separated and placed in different foster homes by morning." Vincent's mind raced as they reached the parking lot. Emma's words echoed in his head. "They'll split us up, put us in different homes with different families." The terror in her voice when she'd said it. The way she'd been willing to starve herself rather than risk losing her siblings. "There has to be something we can do," he said desperately. Sarah stopped beside her car, her keys in her hand. "Unless someone steps forward as a guardian, someone with the resources and stability to take care of 3 children, there's nothing anyone can do. And even then, the process takes months, sometimes years." Vincent stared at her, his mind spinning with possibilities and impossibilities. He was a single man with no experience with children, no family of his own, no idea how to be anything other than what he'd always been. Successful, isolated, and alone. But Emma's face flashed in his mind. Her courage, her love for her siblings, her willingness to sacrifice everything to keep her family together. "What if someone did step forward?" he asked quietly. Sarah looked at him sharply. "Vincent, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," he said, his voice growing stronger with each word, "that I have resources. I have stability. I have a house big enough for 12 children, and more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. You're talking about becoming guardian. Do you understand what that means? It's not just about money. It's about being responsible for 3 human beings, about putting their needs before your own, about becoming a family." Vincent thought about Emma sitting alone in that cafeteria, protecting her siblings with nothing but love and determination. He thought about the letter she'd written to her dead mother, about the way she'd apologized for lying to her little sister about when Mommy was coming home. "I understand," he said, "and I want to try." Sarah studied his face for a long moment, and whatever she saw there seemed to convince her. "Then we'd better hurry. Once they take those children into the system, getting them back becomes 1,000 times harder. As they drove through the city streets toward Lincoln Elementary, Vincent felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. The terrifying, exhilarating sensation of his carefully controlled world spinning completely out of control. But for the first time in his adult life, he wasn't trying to regain control. He was trying to save a family, and he had no idea if he was already too late. The stakes have never been higher, and Vincent is about to face the biggest challenge of his life. But will his wealth and determination be enough to keep Emma's family together? And what happens when the system designed to protect children becomes the very thing threatening to destroy them? The next part will leave you on the edge of your seat. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what happens next. The scene at Lincoln Elementary was Vincent's worst nightmare come to life. Two official vehicles sat in the parking lot like predators waiting to strike. A white van from Child Protective Services and a police cruiser with its lights casting eerie blue and red shadows across the school's brick facade. Through the windows of the main office, Vincent could see figures moving around, and his heart clenched when he spotted three small silhouettes huddled together on plastic chairs. Emma, Tommy, and Sarah. The family she'd fought so hard to protect was about to be torn apart. "Stay calm," Sarah whispered as they approached the building. "Getting emotional won't help anyone right now." But Vincent was already past calm. Seeing those children sitting there, waiting to be separated and shipped off to strangers, ignited something primal in his chest. This was wrong. This was exactly the kind of bureaucratic nightmare that had haunted his own childhood. The system that treated children like problems to be solved rather than human beings to be protected. Inside the office, the scene was even worse than he'd imagined. Emma sat between her siblings, her small arms wrapped around both of them in a protective gesture that broke Vincent's heart. Tommy, a tiny boy with Emma's dark hair and serious eyes, was crying silently into his sister's shoulder. 3-year-old Sarah, the baby Emma had been lying to about their mother's return, was clutching a stuffed rabbit and staring at the adults with the wide-eyed confusion of someone too young to understand why her world was falling apart. A woman in a severe gray suit was speaking to Principal Martinez, while a social worker with kind eyes but tired shoulders filled out paperwork. The police officer stood by the door, his presence a reminder that this wasn't a negotiation. It was a legal proceeding. "Mrs. Connor," Principal Martinez said with obvious relief when Sarah entered. "Thank goodness you're here. I tried to explain that Emma is one of our best students, that she's been managing beautifully, but the law is clear," the woman in the gray suit interrupted. 3 minor children cannot live unsupervised, regardless of academic performance. We have reports of inadequate nutrition, unpaid bills, and no legal guardian present in the home. Vincent felt his temper flare. Inadequate nutrition, as if Emma's sacrifice was a failure rather than an act of love. No legal guardian, as if the 8-year-old who'd been holding her family together wasn't the most responsible person in the room. "And you are?" the CPS worker asked, noticing Vincent for the first time. "Vincent Corleone," he said, stepping forward. "I'm here about these children." The woman's eyebrows rose slightly. Vincent Corleone was a name that carried weight in this city. His company employed thousands. His donations funded hospital wings and scholarship programs. But none of that mattered here, in this fluorescent-lit office where bureaucracy reigned supreme. "Mr. Corleone, while I appreciate your concern, this is a family matter. Unless you have legal standing, I want a petition for emergency guardianship," Vincent said, the words coming out stronger and more certain than he felt. The room went dead silent. Even Tommy stopped crying, and Emma's head snapped up, her eyes wide with something that might have been hope. "Sir," the social worker said gently, "emergency guardianship requires extensive background checks, home studies, financial verification, and court approval. The process takes months, sometimes longer. These children need placement tonight." "Then place them with me tonight," Vincent said. "Temporarily, until the paperwork goes through." The CPS worker, her name tag read Ms. Patterson, shook her head. "It doesn't work that way. We can't place children with someone who hasn't been vetted, regardless of their resources." Vincent felt the walls closing in. All his money, all his influence, all his power, and he was helpless to stop 3 children from being fed into a system that would chew them up and spit them out in different directions. "There might be another option," Sarah said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. "I'm a certified foster parent," she continued. I went through the process 2 years ago when my sister was going through her divorce. I never ended up needing it, but my certification is still active. Ms. Patterson consulted her tablet. Ms. Connor, your file shows approval for emergency placement of up to 2 children. We have 3 here. But if Mr. Corleone were to begin the guardianship process immediately, Sarah said, her voice gaining confidence, and if I were to serve as temporary guardian while that process moves forward, wouldn't that satisfy the immediate safety requirements? Vincent stared at Sarah with something approaching awe. She was offering to upend her entire life for children she barely knew, simply because it was the right thing to do. Ms. Patterson frowned, clearly uncomfortable with any solution that deviated from standard protocol. That would be highly irregular, but legal. Vincent pressed. Technically, yes, but then let's do it, Vincent said. Whatever paperwork needs to be filed, whatever hoops need to be jumped through, whatever it costs, let's do it. For the first time since they'd arrived, Emma spoke up. Her voice was small but steady, carrying the same quiet strength that had gotten her through 127 days without her mother. Excuse me, she said, looking directly at Miss Patterson. Can I ask you something? The social worker's expression softened slightly. Of course, sweetheart. If you take us away tonight, will Tommy and Sarah and I stay together? Miss Patterson's hesitation was answered enough, but Emma pressed on. Because if we can't stay together, then this isn't about keeping us safe. It's about following rules that don't make sense. Emma's voice grew stronger, more confident. My mommy always said that sometimes you have to choose between doing what's easy and doing what's right. And splitting up our family isn't right, even if it's easy for you. Vincent felt his chest swell with pride. This 8-year-old girl was showing more wisdom and courage than most adults he knew. She was fighting for her family with nothing but words and love, and she was magnificent. Miss Patterson looked genuinely moved, but she shook her head. Emma, I understand how you feel, but there are procedures. The procedures are failing these children, Vincent said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. Look at them. Really look at them. Emma has been caring for her siblings for over 4 months. She's made sure they're fed, clothed, and loved. She's kept them together when the world tried to tear them apart. And your solution is to finish the job by separating them. Mr. Corleone, I appreciate your passion, but emotion doesn't override legal requirements. Then let's talk about legal requirements, Vincent said, pulling out his phone. I'm calling my attorney. Right now. We're going to file emergency guardianship papers tonight, and we're going to make sure these children have legal representation to ensure their wishes are heard. Vincent, Sarah said softly, it's almost 8 p.m. The courts are closed. Then we'll find a judge at home. We'll wake up whoever we need to wake up. Vincent's voice was steel-wrapped in determination. I didn't build a company from nothing by accepting no when children's lives were at stake. Ms. Patterson looked between Vincent, Sarah, and the 3 children who were watching this adult drama unfold with the intensity of people whose entire future hung in the balance. There is one possibility, she said finally. If Ms. Connor is willing to take temporary custody tonight, and if Mr. Corleone can demonstrate serious intent to pursue guardianship by filing preliminary paperwork within 48 hours, I might be able to authorize a temporary placement pending review. Yes, Sarah said immediately. Absolutely, Vincent agreed. But, Ms. Patterson continued, this is contingent on a home visit tomorrow, interviews with all parties, and a full review of the situation within 1 week. If anything, and I mean anything, seems inappropriate or unsafe, these children will be removed immediately and placed in separate foster homes. Are we clear? Vincent looked at Emma, who was staring at him with an expression of desperate hope mixed with disbelief. In her eyes, he saw his own childhood self. The boy who'd learned not to trust adults who made promises they couldn't keep. But this was one promise he was going to keep, no matter what it cost him. Crystal clear, he said. As the paperwork was signed and arrangements were made, Vincent found himself standing next to Emma while the adults handled the logistics of temporarily reshaping 4 lives. Vincent, Emma said quietly. Yeah. Why are you doing this? You don't even know us. Vincent crouched down so he was at her eye level, the same way he had in the cafeteria that morning, though it felt like a lifetime ago. Because, he said, sometimes you meet someone who reminds you of who you used to be, and who you could still become. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, you get a chance to make sure they don't have to go through what you went through alone. Emma studied his face with those two wise eyes. Are you going to change your mind? When it gets hard? The question hit him like a physical blow. How many adults had made promises to this little girl and then disappeared when keeping them became inconvenient? Emma, he said, his voice steady and sure. I'm not going anywhere. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not ever. You have my word. For the first time since he'd met her, Emma Watson smiled. Really smiled. And Vincent felt something shift inside his chest. Something that felt suspiciously like hope. But as they prepared to leave the school together, this unlikely family bound by crisis and choice rather than blood, Vincent couldn't shake the feeling that the real challenges were just beginning. Because keeping a family together was about more than money and good intentions. It was about becoming the kind of man who deserved their trust. And Vincent wasn't sure he knew how to be that man yet. Vincent has taken the first step toward changing not just his own life, but the lives of 3 children who desperately need someone to fight for them. But good intentions and deep pockets might not be enough for what's coming next. What do you think will be Vincent's biggest challenge in becoming the guardian these children need? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. This story is about to get even more intense. Sarah's house was nothing like Vincent's penthouse, where his home was all marble and glass and carefully curated emptiness. Hers was warm chaos, mismatched furniture that actually looked lived in, bookshelves crammed with novels and teaching materials, and a kitchen that smelled like cinnamon and coffee instead of industrial cleaning products. The children had been asleep for 2 hours, tucked into Sarah's guest room with Tommy and little Sarah sharing the double bed while Emma insisted on sleeping on an air mattress on the floor. Just in case they have nightmares, she'd explained with the matter-of-fact protectiveness that seemed to define her entire existence. Now Vincent sat at Sarah's kitchen table, surrounded by legal documents, guardianship applications, and the sobering reality of what he'd committed to. His attorney, Marcus Blackwood, had arrived within an hour of Vincent's call, bringing with him a briefcase full of forms and an expression of barely concealed bewilderment. Vincent, Marcus said for the 3rd time, I need you to understand what you're signing up for. This isn't a business acquisition. You can't just throw money at problems when they arise. These are children, traumatized children who've lost their mother and been abandoned by their father. They need stability, consistency, emotional support. I understand, Vincent said, though he wasn't sure he understood anything anymore. Do you? Sarah asked gently. She'd been quiet for most of the evening, helping the children settle in, but now she was studying Vincent with the same intensity Emma had shown in the cafeteria. Because this morning you were a successful businessman who'd never set foot in a public school. Tonight you're trying to become a single father to 3 children. That's not a small leap. Vincent set down his pen and looked at both of them. You want to know why I'm doing this? Really? They nodded. Because when I was 12 years old, I stood in a courtroom and watched strangers decide my future. I was shuffled between foster homes for 6 years, and in every single one, I was just a problem to be managed, a check from the state, a temporary inconvenience. His voice grew rougher with each word. I swore that if I ever had the power to prevent that from happening to someone else, I would. But Vincent, Marcus said carefully, there's a difference between preventing something and taking on the responsibility yourself. You could fund their care, set up trust funds, ensure they stay together in a good foster home. No, the word came out sharper than Vincent intended. I've spent 30 years writing checks and walking away. I've donated millions to children's charities and never met a single child who benefited. I've built an empire on the principle that money can solve any problem. But money didn't help Emma when she was sitting alone in that cafeteria, starving herself to protect her siblings. Sarah leaned forward. What had helped her? Someone caring enough to ask what was wrong. Someone seeing her as more than just a problem to be solved. Vincent met her eyes. I can't give these children their mother back. I can't undo the trauma they've experienced. But I can make sure they never feel abandoned again. And when Emma has nightmares about her mother, when Tommy acts out because he's angry and confused, when Sarah starts kindergarten, you have to explain to other parents why a single businessman is raising 3 children who aren't biologically his. Sarah's questions weren't cruel, but they were relentless. What happens when a honeymoon period ends and you realize that love isn't enough, that good intentions don't automatically make you a good parent? Vincent felt each question like a physical blow, but he forced himself to consider them seriously. She was right to push him. These children deserved more than his good intentions. Then I'll learn, he said finally. I'll make mistakes, and I'll figure out how to do better. I'll get help when I need it, and I'll put their needs before my own comfort. Because the alternative, letting them be separated, letting Emma blame herself for not being strong enough to hold her family together, is unacceptable. Marcus and Sarah exchanged a look that Vincent couldn't quite read. There's something else you need to know, Sarah said quietly. Something I learned tonight when I was helping Emma get ready for bed. Vincent's stomach clenched. What? She's been forging her father's signature on school documents. Report cards, permission slips, emergency contact forms. She's been pretending he's still involved so the school wouldn't ask questions about their living situation. Jesus, Vincent breathed. That's not all. She's also been doing odd jobs around the neighborhood, walking dogs, helping elderly neighbors with groceries, babysitting for families who pay her under the table. She's been trying to earn money to keep the utilities on and buy food for her siblings. Vincent felt something crack open in his chest. She's 8 years old. She's 8 years old, and she's been functioning as the head of household for 4 months, Sarah confirmed. Vincent, this child has been carrying burdens that would break most adults. The question isn't whether you can provide for them financially. It's whether you can help Emma learn how to be a child again. The weight of that responsibility settled on Vincent's shoulders like a physical thing. He'd thought this was about money, about resources, about using his privilege to solve a problem. But it was so much more complicated than that. How do I do that? He asked. And for the first time in decades, Vincent Corleone admitted he didn't have the answers. You start by understanding that healing takes time, Sarah said. Emma has been in survival mode for so long that she doesn't know how to trust that someone else will take care of things. She's going to test you, probably in ways that will break your heart. She's going to push you away because everyone she's ever loved has left her. And Tommy and Sarah? Tommy is angry. He's 5 years old, and he doesn't understand why his mother died, or why his father left, or why his sister cries when she thinks no one is looking. He's going to act out, probably in spectacular ways. Sarah's voice was gentle but unflinching. And Sarah is 3. She's going to ask for her mommy every day, and you're going to have to find ways to comfort her when there is no comfort to be given. Vincent stared down at the guardianship papers, the legal language suddenly seeming inadequate for the magnitude of what he was taking on. These weren't just children who needed a home. They were wounded souls who needed healing, and he had no idea how to provide that. Maybe Marcus is right, he said quietly. Maybe I should find them a good foster family, make sure they stay together, provide financial support. Vincent, the voice came from the doorway, small and clear and absolutely certain. Emma stood there in borrowed pajamas that were too big for her hair messed from sleep, her eyes wide and serious. How long had she been listening? Emma, sweetheart, you should be sleeping, Sarah said gently. I heard you talking, Emma said, walking into the kitchen with the careful dignity of someone much older. You're having second thoughts. Vincent's throat closed up. Emma, it's okay, she said, and the matter-of-fact way she said it nearly destroyed him. I understand. We're a lot of work, and you didn't ask for this. That's not. Vincent started, then stopped. How could he explain that his hesitation wasn't about not wanting them, but about being terrified that he wasn't good enough for them? Emma climbed onto the chair next to him, her small hands folding in her lap in that gesture he was beginning to recognize as her way of preparing for difficult conversations. Can I tell you something? She asked. Vincent nodded, not trusting his voice. When my mommy was sick, really sick at the end, she made me promise something. She said that no matter what happened, I had to remember that love isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up, even when you're scared, even when you don't know what you're doing. Emma's voice was steady, but Vincent could see the tears gathering in her eyes. She said that the people who love you aren't the ones who never make mistakes. They're the ones who make mistakes and then try to do better. They're the ones who stay, even when staying is hard. Vincent felt his own eyes burning. Emma, I don't need you to be perfect, Vincent. I just need you to stay. Tommy and Sarah and I, we're good at figuring things out together. We've been doing it for a long time, but we can't do it alone anymore. We need someone who won't leave when things get scary. She reached over and put her small hand on top of his, and Vincent felt something shift inside him, something fundamental and irreversible. "Can you do that?" she asked. "Can you stay, even when it's hard?" Vincent looked at this incredible little girl who'd been through hell and somehow emerged with her capacity for love intact. He thought about the boy he'd been, standing in that courtroom, wishing desperately for someone to choose him, to fight for him, to promise they wouldn't leave. "Yes," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I can do that. I will do that." Emma smiled then, and it was like watching the sun rise after the longest night of his life. "Good," she said simply, "because we're going to need you tomorrow when the social worker comes back, and probably the day after that too." As Emma padded back to bed, Vincent sat in Sarah's kitchen, surrounded by legal documents and the overwhelming reality of what he'd committed to. But for the first time since this whole thing started, he wasn't thinking about what he was giving up. He was thinking about what he was gaining. A family, a purpose, a chance to be the person he'd always wished someone had been for him. It was terrifying and wonderful and completely insane, and he couldn't wait to get started. Vincent has made his choice, but the real test is just beginning. Emma's wisdom and strength continue to amaze. But will it be enough to hold this new family together when the challenges really start? The next part will show you just how much Vincent's world is about to change. And trust me, you're not ready for what's coming. Make sure you're subscribed because this story is about to take a turn that will leave you speechless. 3 weeks later, Vincent's carefully ordered world had been turned completely upside down, and he was beginning to understand why Sarah had warned him about the honeymoon period ending. It started with Tommy. The 5-year-old had been quiet for the first few days in Vincent's penthouse. Too quiet, Sarah had warned, like a storm gathering strength. Vincent had foolishly thought that meant Tommy was adjusting well. He converted his home office into a playroom, hired a nanny with impeccable credentials, and enrolled all 3 children in the best schools money could buy. What he hadn't anticipated was coming home from a board meeting to find his living room destroyed, his expensive furniture overturned, and Tommy standing in the middle of the chaos with tears streaming down his face and a baseball bat in his hands. "I want my mommy," Tommy screamed when he saw Vincent. "I want my real daddy. I don't want to live here." The nanny, Mrs. Henderson, stood helplessly in the corner while Emma tried to calm her brother, and little Sarah sobbed in confusion. Vincent's first instinct was to call someone, his assistant, a child psychologist, anyone who might know how to handle this situation. But then he saw Emma's face, saw the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her 8-year-old shoulders as she prepared to fix yet another problem that wasn't hers to solve. "Emma, take Sarah to her room," Vincent said quietly. "I've got this." But Tommy's really upset, and sometimes when he gets like this, "I've got this," Vincent repeated, more firmly this time. "Go." For the next 2 hours, Vincent sat on his destroyed living room floor while Tommy raged and cried and threw things and screamed about how much he hated everything. Vincent didn't try to stop him or calm him down or fix anything. He just sat there, present and steady, until Tommy finally collapsed in exhaustion and let Vincent hold him while he sobbed for the mother who would never come home. That was Tuesday. Wednesday brought a call from Emma's school. She'd been caught stealing food from other children's lunches, not eating it, but hoarding it in her backpack, just in case. When Vincent arrived for the meeting with her teacher and the school counselor, Emma sat in the chair with her hands folded and her face blank, looking like she was preparing for execution. "I'm sorry," she said before anyone could speak. "I know stealing is wrong. I'll pay everyone back." "Emma," Vincent said gently, "why were you taking the food?" She looked at him with those 2 wise eyes. "Because what if you change your mind? What if the social worker decides we can't stay? What if something happens and there's no food again?" The counselor explained that this was normal behavior for children who'd experienced food insecurity, but Vincent felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Despite everything he'd done, despite the fully stocked kitchen and the promise that she'd never go hungry again, Emma was still living in survival mode. Thursday was little Sarah's turn. The 3-year-old, who'd been the easiest of the siblings to care for, suddenly started having nightmares so severe that she'd wake up screaming for her mother. But when Vincent or the nanny tried to comfort her, she'd push them away and cry harder. "She only wants Emma," Mrs. Henderson explained apologetically. "She won't let anyone else touch her when she's upset." Vincent watched through the doorway as Emma, exhausted from her own sleepless nights, climbed into Sarah's bed and held her baby sister until the crying stopped. 8 years old, and she was still the one holding everyone together. By Friday, Vincent was questioning everything. Maybe Marcus had been right. Maybe good intentions weren't enough. Maybe these children needed more than he could give them. That's when Ms. Patterson showed up for her weekly check-in and delivered the news that shattered what was left of Vincent's confidence. "Mr. Corleone," she said, settling into his living room with her ever-present tablet and clipboard, "I've received some concerning reports." Vincent's blood turned to ice. "What kind of reports?" "Anonymous calls to our hotline. Someone claiming that the children are being neglected, that they're exhibiting behavioral problems, that the living situation is unstable." Ms. Patterson's voice was carefully neutral, but Vincent could see the doubt in her eyes. "I'm required to investigate any allegations of this nature." "Who would call in false reports?" Vincent asked, though even as he said it, he had a sinking feeling he knew the answer. The calls came from someone claiming to be a concerned neighbor. They mentioned specific incidents: Tommy's outburst earlier this week, Emma's issues at school, Sarah's sleep disturbances. Ms. Patterson consulted her notes. "They also mentioned that you've been hiring multiple nannies, suggesting instability in the children's care." Vincent felt the walls closing in. He'd fired 3 nannies in 2 weeks. Not because they were incompetent, but because none of them understood that these children needed more than professional child care. They needed patience and understanding and the kind of love that couldn't be bought. "Ms. Patterson, I can explain all of these incidents." "I'm sure you can, Mr. Corleone. But the fact remains that these children are displaying signs of significant distress. Tommy's violent outburst, Emma's hoarding behavior, Sarah's regression. These are red flags that suggest the current placement may not be in their best interests." "They're grieving," Vincent said desperately. "They've lost their mother, been abandoned by their father, and now they're trying to adjust to a completely new life. Of course they're having problems, which is exactly why they might be better served in a more traditional foster care setting, with people who have experience dealing with traumatized children." Vincent felt his world tilting. "You want to separate them. I want what's best for them. And right now, I'm not convinced that's living with a single man who has no experience with children and unlimited resources to hire his way out of problems instead of actually addressing them." The accusation hit Vincent like a physical blow. Was that what he'd been doing? Throwing money at problems instead of actually being present for these children? "I'd like to speak with Emma," Ms. Patterson continued. "Alone." Vincent's heart clenched. Emma was in her room, probably doing homework or writing another letter to her mother. She'd been quieter than usual this week, and Vincent had been so focused on Tommy's outbursts and Sarah's nightmares that he hadn't given her the attention she needed. 20 minutes later, Ms. Patterson emerged from Emma's room with an expression that made Vincent's stomach drop. "Mr. Corleone, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course." "Emma tells me that you've been working late every night this week, that you've missed dinner with him 4 times, that when Tommy had his breakdown, you handled it by yourself instead of calling for professional help." Ms. Patterson's voice was getting colder with each word. "She also says that you've been asking her to help with her siblings' problems instead of handling them yourself." Vincent felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. "That's not. I mean, yes, I've been working, but I'm trying to balance." "Mr. Corleone, Emma is 8 years old. She's been parentified for months, forced to take on adult responsibilities that no child should have to carry. The goal of this placement was to allow her to be a child again, not to continue using her as a co-parent." The words hit Vincent like bullets. Everything Ms. Patterson was saying was true. He had been relying on Emma's wisdom and maturity. He had been working late, trying to maintain his business while learning how to be a guardian. He had been making mistakes, and those mistakes were hurting the very children he was trying to protect. "I can do better," he said desperately. "I'm still learning, but I can." "Mr. Corleone, I'm going to be frank with you." The anonymous caller also provided some interesting information about your background, your own time in foster care, your lack of any long-term relationships, your reputation as someone who solves problems with money rather than emotional investment. Ms. Patterson's voice was gentle but implacable. "I'm beginning to think that your desire to help these children is more about resolving your own childhood trauma than about what's actually best for them." Vincent felt like he'd been slapped. "That's not true, isn't it? You saw Emma in that cafeteria, and you saw yourself. You wanted to be the adult you wished you'd had. But wanting to be a savior and actually being capable of providing stable, nurturing care are two very different things. Before Vincent could respond, Emma appeared in the doorway. She'd obviously been listening, and the expression on her face made Vincent's heart shatter into a million pieces. "Emma," he started, but she held up her small hand to stop him. "It's okay, Vincent," she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "I understand." "No, you don't understand. I'm not giving up. I'm not walking away." "But maybe you should," Emma said quietly. "Maybe Miss Patterson is right. Maybe we're too much work. Maybe you'd be happier if you went back to your old life." The words were like knives to Vincent's chest, but what destroyed him was the way Emma said them, with the resigned acceptance of someone who'd learned not to expect adults to keep their promises. "Emma, that's not what I want." "But it's easier," she said, "and grown-ups usually choose what's easier." As Miss Patterson gathered her things and prepared to leave, she delivered the final blow. "Mr. Corleone, I'm scheduling a formal review for Monday morning. I'll be interviewing the children separately, conducting a thorough assessment of the living situation, and making a recommendation to the court about whether this placement should continue." She paused at the door. "I suggest you use the weekend to seriously consider whether you're prepared for the reality of raising 3 traumatized children, or whether it would be kinder to everyone involved to let them go to a family better equipped to handle their needs." After she left, Vincent stood in his living room, the same room where Tommy had destroyed his furniture, where he'd held a sobbing 5-year-old and promised everything would be okay, and wondered if he'd been lying to himself all along. Maybe he wasn't the hero in this story. Maybe he was just another adult who'd made promises he couldn't keep. Vincent's world is crumbling, and for the first time, he's facing the possibility that love might not be enough. But sometimes the darkest hour comes right before the dawn, and sometimes the most important battles are the ones we fight for the people we love, even when we're not sure we deserve them. What do you think Vincent should do? Should he fight for this family, or let them go? Share your thoughts in the comments. And make sure you're subscribed, because the next part will determine the fate of this unlikely family forever. Vincent didn't sleep that night. He sat in his home office, the room that used to be his sanctuary but now felt like a monument to his failures, staring at the guardianship papers scattered across his desk. Every legal document seemed to mock him with its official language about best interests of the children and suitable living arrangements. At 3 a.m., he found himself standing outside Emma's bedroom door, listening to the soft sounds of 3 children sleeping. Tommy had crawled into bed with his sisters again, and through the crack in the door, Vincent could see them curled together like puppies seeking warmth. Even in sleep, Emma's arm was protectively wrapped around both her siblings. She was still taking care of everyone, even when she should have been able to rest. Vincent was about to turn away when he heard it, a soft whimpering that made his heart clench. Sarah was having another nightmare, her small body trembling as she fought invisible demons in her sleep. Vincent watched as Emma automatically stirred, her eyes opening with the practiced alertness of someone who'd been on guard duty for months. But instead of immediately comforting Sarah, Emma looked toward the door. Their eyes met through the crack, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then Emma did something that broke Vincent's heart and changed everything. She looked at him with those 2 wise eyes and whispered, "Can you help her? I'm really tired." It was the first time Emma had ever asked him for help. The first time she'd admitted that she couldn't handle everything alone. The first time she trusted him enough to let him be the adult. Vincent slipped into the room and gently lifted Sarah from the bed, careful not to wake Tommy. The 3-year-old immediately curled into his chest, her small fists clutching his shirt as she continued to whimper in her sleep. "Mommy," she whispered, the word muffled against his shoulder. "I know, sweetheart," Vincent said softly, settling into the rocking chair he'd bought but never used. "I know you miss her." For the next hour, Vincent held Sarah while she slept fitfully in his arms. Emma had fallen back asleep, but Vincent could see the exhaustion in her small face, the weight of responsibility that no 8-year-old should have to carry. That's when it hit him. Ms. Patterson was right about one thing. He had been asking Emma to help with her siblings' problems, but not because he was lazy or incompetent. He'd been doing it because Emma was so good at it, so naturally nurturing and wise, that it seemed cruel to exclude her from caring for the people she loved most. But what Emma needed wasn't to be useful. What she needed was to be a child. As the sun began to rise over the city, Vincent made a decision that would either save his family or destroy his last chance at keeping them together. He was going to tell Miss Patterson the truth. All of it. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, matching Vincent's mood as he prepared for what might be the most important meeting of his life. He'd spend the weekend making phone calls, gathering documents, and doing something he'd never done before in his professional life, admitting his mistakes and asking for help. Ms. Patterson arrived at exactly 9 a.m., accompanied by a court-appointed child advocate and a family therapist. The living room had been transformed into an impromptu courtroom where the fate of 3 children would be decided. Mr. Corleone, Ms. Patterson began, settling into her chair with her familiar clipboard. Before we begin the formal interviews, do you have anything you'd like to say? Vincent looked at the 3 professionals sitting across from him, then at Emma, Tommy, and Sarah, who were waiting in the kitchen with Sarah Connor. His entire future, their entire future, hung on what he said next. Yes, he said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through his veins. I want to tell you about the worst mistake I've made in the past 3 weeks. Miss Patterson's eyebrows rose slightly. Go on. I've been treating Emma like a partner instead of a child. I've been relying on her wisdom and maturity because she's so incredibly capable. But in doing so, I've failed to protect her from the very thing I was supposed to rescue her from, the burden of being responsible for everyone else's well-being. Vincent pulled out a folder he'd prepared. I've spent the weekend researching trauma-informed parenting. I've scheduled appointments with child psychologists who specialize in grief counseling. I've arranged for family therapy sessions and enrolled in parenting classes specifically designed for guardians of children who've experienced loss. The child advocate leaned forward. Mr. Corleone, while we appreciate your willingness to seek help, the question remains whether you're capable of providing the stability these children need. You're right to question that, Vincent said. 3 weeks ago, I didn't know how to make a peanut butter sandwich. I'd never dealt with a child's tantrum or nightmare or anxiety attack. I was completely unprepared for the reality of what these children had been through. And now, Ms. Patterson asked, now I know that being unprepared doesn't mean being incapable. It means being willing to learn. Vincent's voice grew stronger. I've made mistakes, serious ones. I've worked too much, relied too heavily on Emma's strength, and tried to solve emotional problems with practical solutions. But I've also been here. Every night, every morning, every crisis. I haven't walked away, and I won't walk away. The family therapist spoke up. Mr. Corleone, what makes you think you can provide what these children need when you have no experience with family relationships yourself? It was the question Vincent had been dreading, but also the one he was most prepared to answer. Because, he said, I know what it feels like to be abandoned. I know what it's like to be shuffled between homes where you're just a temporary inconvenience. I know what it's like to build walls so high that no one can hurt you, but also so high that no one can love you. Vincent's voice cracked slightly. These children have been through hell, but they haven't lost their capacity to love. Emma still writes letters to her mother. Tommy still believes that someone will keep him safe. Sarah still reaches for comfort when she's scared. They're everything I forgot how to be, and they're teaching me how to be human again. That's very touching, Ms. Patterson said. But emotional connection isn't enough. These children need practical stability, consistent care. Which is why I'm not doing this alone, Vincent interrupted. He pulled out another set of documents. Sarah Connor has agreed to move into the guest wing of my home as a live-in family support specialist. She'll help with daily routines, school coordination, and provide the kind of nurturing presence these children need while I learn how to be the guardian they deserve. Ms. Patterson looked surprised. Ms. Connor agreed to this. She did, because she believes, as I do, that these children belong together. That Emma shouldn't have to choose between being a child and protecting her siblings. That Tommy deserves to work through his anger in a place where he's loved unconditionally. That Sarah needs to grieve her mother without losing the family she has left. The child advocate consulted her notes. Mr. Corleone, we've received reports that you've been hiring and firing nannies, suggesting instability in the children's care. I fired 3 nannies because they treated the children like problems to be managed instead of human beings to be loved, Vincent said firmly. I fired them because they tried to separate the siblings when they were comforting each other. I fired them because they didn't understand that sometimes a 5-year-old needs to break things when he's grieving, and sometimes an 8-year-old needs to hoard food because she's afraid of being hungry again. Vincent stood up, his voice growing passionate. You want to know about stability? Emma has been the most stable thing in her siblings' lives for 4 months. She's fed them, protected them, loved them, and sacrificed everything for them. The most unstable thing we could do right now is tear that family apart. Mr. Corleone, Ms. Patterson said quietly, what about the anonymous reports? The allegations of neglect? Vincent's jaw tightened. I hired a private investigator to trace those calls. They came from my business partner's ex-wife, a woman who's been trying to damage my reputation in our custody battle. She saw an opportunity to hurt me by targeting the children, and she took it. He handed over a thick folder. Phone records, witness statements, and a confession she made to a mutual friend, thinking it wouldn't get back to me. The reports were completely fabricated. The room fell silent as the 3 professionals absorbed this information. Finally, the family therapist spoke. Mr. Corleone, if we were to recommend continuing this placement, what assurances can you give us that you're committed to putting these children's needs first? Vincent thought about Emma asking him to help with Sarah's nightmare, about Tommy falling asleep in his arms after destroying the living room, about little Sarah calling him Vincent instead of Sir for the first time just yesterday. I can't promise I won't make mistakes, he said. I can't promise it will be easy, or that I'll always know what to do. But I can promise that these children will never doubt that they're loved. They'll never wonder if they're wanted. They'll never have to choose between being a family and being safe. Vincent's voice broke slightly. And I can promise that Emma will get to be 8 years old. That Tommy will get to be angry and sad in 5. That Sarah will get to grieve her mother while being surrounded by people who love her. They'll get to be children because that's what they are. That's what they deserve to be. From the kitchen came the sound of quiet footsteps, and Vincent turned to see Emma standing in the doorway. She'd been listening again, but this time, instead of resignation in her eyes, he saw something that made his heart soar. Hope. Ms. Patterson, Emma said quietly. Can I say something? The social worker nodded. Vincent's not perfect, Emma said, walking into the room with that careful dignity that broke Vincent's heart every time. He burns pancakes, and he doesn't know how to braid hair, and sometimes he tries to fix sad feelings with ice cream. Vincent felt his cheeks flush, but Emma wasn't finished. But he stays. When Tommy threw his baseball bat at the TV, Vincent didn't get mad. He just sat with him until Tommy was ready to talk. When I got in trouble at school, he didn't lecture me. He asked me what I needed to feel safe. When Sarah has nightmares, he rocks her back to sleep, even though he has to work early the next morning. Emma's voice grew stronger. My mommy used to say that family isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up. Vincent shows up. Every day. Even when we're difficult. Even when we're scared. Even when we don't make it easy. She looked directly at Ms. Patterson. I don't want a perfect family. I just want my family. And Vincent is part of that now. The silence that followed was deafening. Vincent felt tears burning his eyes as he looked at this incredible little girl who just fought for him the way he'd been trying to fight for her. Ms. Patterson closed her folder and looked at her colleagues. After a whispered conference, she turned back to Vincent. Mr. Corleone, we're going to recommend that the placement continue with the following conditions: mandatory family therapy, regular check-ins, and a formal support system that includes Ms. Connor's involvement. Vincent felt his knees nearly buckle with relief, but Ms. Patterson wasn't finished. However, this is contingent on one final thing. We need to know that you understand what you're really committing to. This isn't a trial run or a temporary arrangement. If we approve this placement, you're agreeing to be these children's father in every way that matters. Are you prepared for that responsibility? Vincent looked at Emma, who was watching him with those wise, hopeful eyes. He thought about Tommy's rage and Sarah's nightmares and all the challenges that lay ahead. He thought about the man he'd been 3 weeks ago, successful, isolated, and empty, and the man he was becoming. Yes, he said, his voice steady and sure. I'm prepared to be their father, for as long as they'll have me. Emma smiled then, the first real, unguarded smile he'd seen from her, and Vincent knew that whatever came next, they'd face it together. As a family, the turning point has arrived, and Vincent has found the courage to fight for what matters most. But the real test of this new family is just beginning. Will love and determination be enough to heal the wounds of the past and build a future together? The climax is coming, and you won't believe how this incredible story reaches its emotional peak. Don't forget to subscribe. You won't want to miss the powerful conclusion. 6 months later, Vincent stood in the kitchen of his penthouse, now truly a home rather than just an expensive address, watching Emma help Tommy with his homework while Sarah played with blocks on the floor. The scene was so beautifully ordinary that it still took his breath away sometimes. But today wasn't ordinary. Today was the day that would determine whether their family would become legally permanent or whether the past would finally catch up with them. The doorbell rang, and Vincent's stomach clenched. Through the intercom, his doorman announced the arrival he'd been both anticipating and dreading for weeks. "Mr. Corleone, there's a Mr. David Watson here to see you. He says he's the children's father." The words hit the room like a bomb. Emma's pencil froze mid-sentence. Tommy looked up from his math worksheet with confusion and something that might have been hope. Little Sarah, now 4 and more verbal than ever, tilted her head with curiosity. "Daddy?" she asked, the word uncertain on her lips. Vincent felt his world tilt. David Watson, the man who'd abandoned his children when their mother was dying, who'd disappeared without a trace for over 10 months, had chosen today, of all days, to return. Today, the final guardianship hearing was scheduled for tomorrow morning. "Emma," Vincent said quietly, "take Tommy and Sarah to the playroom. I need to handle this." But Emma was already standing, her small body rigid with a tension that broke Vincent's heart. "No," she said firmly. "If he's here, we should all hear what he has to say. Emma, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." Her voice carried the same quiet strength that had sustained her family through their darkest days. "We're not hiding anymore, remember? We're not pretending everything is okay when it's not." Vincent looked at this incredible 8-year-old who continued to amaze him with her wisdom and courage. "Are you sure?" Emma nodded, then walked over to her siblings. "Tommy, Sarah, someone's here to see us." Someone from before Vincent. "Do you remember Daddy?" Tommy's face scrunched up in concentration. "The man who made Mommy cry." "Yes," Emma said simply. "That man." Sarah looked between her siblings with the confusion of someone too young to understand abandonment, but old enough to sense tension. "Is he nice like Vincent?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Vincent felt a surge of protective fury at the man who'd put these children in a position where they had to wonder if their own father was nice. "Let's find out," Emma said with a maturity that no child should have to possess. Vincent buzzed David Watson up, his mind racing through possibilities and legal implications. What did this man want? Why now? And most importantly, how could Vincent protect the children from whatever emotional devastation was about to walk through his door? When the elevator opened, Vincent got his first look at the man who'd fathered the 3 most incredible children he'd ever known. David Watson was younger than Vincent had expected, maybe 35, with Emma's dark hair and Tommy's serious eyes. He was well-dressed, but nervous, his hands shaking slightly as he stepped into the penthouse. "Mr. Corleone," David said, his voice uncertain. "Thank you for seeing me." "I'm not doing this for you," Vincent replied coldly. "I'm doing this for them." David's eyes found his children, and Vincent watched a dozen emotions play across his face: guilt, regret, love, fear. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Sarah, with the fearless curiosity of a 4-year-old, walked up to the stranger and stared at him with frank assessment. "Are you my daddy?" she asked. David's face crumpled. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm your daddy. Where have you been?" The question came from Tommy, and it carried the weight of months of confusion and abandonment. "Mommy said you went away, but she wouldn't tell us why." Vincent watched David struggle to find words that could possibly explain the inexplicable. How do you tell a 5-year-old that you ran away because watching someone you love die was too hard? How do you justify abandoning 3 children who needed you most? I made a mistake," David said finally. "A big mistake. I was scared and sad about Mommy being sick, and I thought it would be easier if I wasn't there to make things worse. But it wasn't easier," Emma said quietly. "It was harder. Much harder." David's eyes filled with tears as he looked at his eldest daughter. "Emma, sweetheart, I know I hurt you. I know I left when you needed me most. I've been trying to get my life together, trying to become the kind of father you deserve." We needed the father we had. Emma interrupted, her voice steady but fierce. We didn't need you to be perfect. We needed you to stay. The words hit David like physical blows, and Vincent felt a complicated mix of satisfaction and pity. This man was getting exactly what he deserved, but watching him crumble in front of his children wasn't bringing Vincent any joy. Why are you here now? Vincent asked, stepping slightly in front of the children in an unconsciously protective gesture. David straightened, and Vincent saw a flash of something harder in his eyes. I'm here because I've got my life together. I have a job, an apartment, and a support system. I'm ready to be their father again. Again, Vincent's voice was dangerously quiet. You were never their father. A father doesn't abandon his children when their mother is dying. A father doesn't disappear for 10 months while his 8-year-old daughter starved herself to keep her siblings fed. You don't understand, David said, his voice rising. I was grieving. I was falling apart. I couldn't handle watching Lisa die and try and take care of 3 kids at the same time. So you chose to handle neither, Vincent shot back. You left your children to grieve alone while you figured out your own problems. And what about you? David's composure was cracking. You think you could just swoop in with your money and your big house and replace me? You think you can buy my children? I think, Vincent said, his voice like steel, that I've been here every day for 6 months, through nightmares and tantrums and homework and bedtime stories and everything else that comes with actually being a parent. I'm their biological father. Biology doesn't make you a father, Emma said, her small voice cutting through the adult argument like a knife. Being there makes you a father. Loving us, even when we're difficult, makes you a father. Staying when things get scary makes you a father. She looked at David with those 2 wise eyes. Vincent is our father now. You're just the man who helped make us. The silence that followed was deafening. David stared at his daughter, this incredible little girl who'd grown up in his absence. And Vincent could see the moment when reality hit him. He'd lost them. Not to Vincent, not to the system, but to his own choices. Emma, David said, his voice breaking, I love you. I love all of you. I know I made mistakes, but I want to try again. I want to be your father. You can't just decide that now, Tommy said, surprising everyone with his clarity. You can't leave and then come back and expect everything to be the same. But I'm better now, David pleaded. I'm ready now. We were ready then, Emma said simply. When Mommy was sick and we were scared and we needed you. We were ready for you to be our daddy then. But you weren't ready for us. Vincent felt his heart breaking for everyone in the room. For the children who'd been abandoned. For the man who'd made the worst possible choice at the worst possible time. And for himself, because he knew what was coming next. I'm taking you to court, David said, his desperation making him cruel. I'm going to fight for custody. They're my children, and no judge is going to give them to a stranger when their real father wants them back. David, Vincent said quietly, don't do this. Don't put them through a custody battle. They've been through enough. They're my children. No, Emma said, her voice ringing with absolute certainty. We're not. She walked over to Vincent and took his hand, her small fingers intertwining with his. Tommy followed Sarah, until all 3 children were standing with Vincent, facing the man who'd given them life, but abandoned them when they needed him most. We're Vincent's children now, Emma continued. He chose us. He fought for us. He stayed when staying was hard. That makes him our real father. David looked at his children, these 3 incredible human beings he'd helped create but failed to protect, and Vincent saw the exact moment when he understood what he'd lost. I could still fight this in court, David said weakly. You could, Vincent agreed. But ask yourself this. What's best for them? A legal battle that forces them to choose between the father who abandoned them and the father who saved them? Or letting them stay with the family they've built, the stability they've found, the love they deserve? David's shoulders sagged as the fight went out of him. They hate me. No, Emma said softly, and Vincent was amazed by her capacity for compassion, even now. We don't hate you. We're just not yours anymore. We're Vincent's. We're each other's. We're family. She paused, then added with the wisdom of someone far older than her years. Maybe someday, when we're ready, we can be friends. But you can't be our daddy. That job is taken. David looked around the room, at the home Vincent had created for his children, at the family photos on the walls, at the evidence of a life built on love and commitment rather than biology and obligation. When his eyes met Vincent's, there was no anger left, only a deep, bone-deep regret. "Take care of them," he said quietly. "I will," Vincent promised. "Always. And if they ever want to know about their mother, about the good times before everything went wrong, they'll know," Vincent said. "They'll know all of it, the good and the bad. They'll know their story." David nodded, then knelt down to his children's level. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick with tears. "I'm so sorry I wasn't the father you needed. But I'm glad. I'm glad you found someone who is." He stood and walked toward the elevator, then paused at the threshold. "Emma." She looked at him with those wise, forgiving eyes. "Your mother would be so proud of who you've become, of how you took care of your brother and sister, of how brave and strong and loving you are." His voice broke. "I'm proud of you too. All of you." After David left, the four of them stood in the living room, processing what had just happened. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "Vincent, are you really our daddy now?" Vincent knelt down, so he was at their level. These three children who'd changed his life in ways he was still discovering. "If you want me to be." "Forever?" Tommy asked. "Forever," Vincent promised. "Even when we're teenagers, and probably really annoying?" Emma asked with a small smile. Vincent laughed, the sound rich with love and joy and the promise of all the years ahead. "Especially then." Emma threw her arms around his neck, and Tommy and Sarah quickly joined the hug. As Vincent held his children, because that's what they were now, legally and emotionally and in every way that mattered, he thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago. Successful but empty. Rich but poor in all the ways that counted. These children had saved him just as much as he'd saved them. Tomorrow, a judge will make their family official. But Vincent already knew the truth that no court document could capture. They'd been a family from the moment Emma had trusted him enough to ask for help. Everything else was just paperwork. The confrontation with David has ended, but it's brought this unlikely family closer together than ever. Vincent has proven that being a father isn't about biology. It's about love, commitment, and showing up when it matters most. But there's still one more chapter to this incredible story, and the ending will leave you with tears of joy. Make sure you're subscribed, because the conclusion is going to be absolutely beautiful. 1 year later, Vincent stood in the kitchen of their home, no longer his penthouse, but truly their home, watching Emma pack lunch for herself and her siblings. She moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been doing this for months, but there was something different about her now, something lighter. She was humming. It was such a simple thing, but it stopped Vincent in his tracks. When was the last time he'd heard Emma hum? When was the last time she'd done anything just because it brought her joy, rather than because it needed to be done? "Turkey and cheese, cut diagonally," she announced, holding up Tommy's sandwich with mock seriousness. "Bendy straw juice box, apple slices with lemon juice, and..." She paused dramatically. "Homemade chocolate chip cookies, courtesy of Sarah Connor's secret recipe." "Those are MY cookies," 6-year-old Tommy protested, though he was grinning. "You can't just give them away." "I made extra," Emma laughed, ruffling his hair. "Besides, sharing is caring, remember?" Vincent smiled as he watched the exchange. Tommy had grown so much in the past year. Not just physically, though he'd shot up 3 inches, but emotionally. The angry, confused little boy who destroyed Vincent's living room had transformed into a typical 6-year-old who still had his moments, but no longer carried the weight of the world on his small shoulders. "Vincent," Sarah called from the living room, where she was supposed to be putting on her shoes. "I can't find Mr. Hoppy." Mr. Hoppy was the stuffed rabbit that had been Sarah's constant companion since before her mother died. Losing him was still a crisis of epic proportions, though thankfully these crises were becoming less frequent. "Check under the couch cushions," Vincent called back, not even looking up from his coffee. "That's where he was yesterday." "Found him." Sarah's voice was triumphant. "He was having an adventure." Vincent chuckled. At 5 years old, Sarah had developed an elaborate fantasy life where her stuffed animals went on adventures while she slept. It was a healthy way of processing her world, according to Dr. Martinez, the family therapist who become an integral part of their lives. "Dad," Emma said, and Vincent's heart still skipped a beat every time she called him that. "Don't forget you have the parent-teacher conference today at 3 p.m. "Already on my calendar," Vincent replied, holding up his phone. "Mrs. Rodriguez wants to discuss your application for the gifted program." Emma's face lit up. "Do you think I'll get in?" "I think," Vincent said, pulling her into a quick hug, "that you're the smartest, most capable kid I know, and any program will be lucky to have you." It was true. Emma's grades had improved dramatically once she'd been able to focus on being a student instead of a surrogate parent. She was reading at a high school level, excelling in math, and had recently started a peer tutoring program for younger students. But more importantly, she was finally getting to be 9 years old. "Okay, troops," Sarah Connor announced, entering the kitchen with her usual morning energy. "Backpacks, lunchboxes, and let's move out. We don't want to be late for the last day of school." Sarah had officially moved into the guest wing 8 months ago, and Vincent couldn't imagine their family without her. She'd become more than just a live-in support specialist. She was Emma's confidant, Tommy's homework helper, little Sarah's story reader, and Vincent's partner in the beautiful chaos of raising 3 children. She was also, if Vincent was being honest with himself, something more than that. Something he was still figuring out how to name. "I can't believe summer vacation starts today," Tommy said, bouncing with excitement. "Are we really going to Disneyland?" "We really are," Vincent confirmed. 2 weeks in California, just the 5 of us. 6, Sarah corrected with a smile. "Don't forget about Mr. Hoppy. He's very excited about Space Mountain." As they gathered their things and prepared to leave for school, Vincent marveled at how normal this all felt. A year ago, he'd been a man who ate breakfast alone in silence, reading financial reports while his coffee grew cold. Now his mornings were filled with the controlled chaos of family life. Lost homework, forgotten permission slips, arguments over who got the last of the good cereal. He wouldn't trade it for anything. "Vincent," Emma said quietly as they waited for the elevator, "can I ask you something?" "Always. Do you ever miss it? Your old life? When everything was quiet and organized, and you didn't have to worry about anyone but yourself?" It was a question she'd asked variations of before, usually when she was feeling insecure about the changes her presence had brought to his life. Vincent had learned to answer it honestly, because Emma could spot a lie from a mile away. "Sometimes," he said, "sometimes I miss being able to work late without worrying about missing dinner. Sometimes I miss having a living room that stays clean for more than 5 minutes." "Take care of them," he said quietly. "I will," Vincent promised. "Always. And if they ever want to know about their mother, about the good times before everything went wrong, they'll know," Vincent said. "They'll know all of it, the good and the bad. They'll know their story." David nodded, then knelt down to his children's level. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick with tears. "I'm so sorry I wasn't the father you needed. But I'm glad. I'm glad you found someone who is." He stood and walked toward the elevator, then paused at the threshold. "Emma." She looked at him with those wise, forgiving eyes. "Your mother would be so proud of who you've become, of how you took care of your brother and sister, of how brave and strong and loving you are." His voice broke. "I'm proud of you too, all of you." After David left, the 4 of them stood in the living room, processing what had just happened. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "Vincent, are you really our daddy now?" Vincent knelt down, so he was at their level. These 3 children who'd changed his life in ways he was still discovering. "If you want me to be forever?" Tommy asked. "Forever," Vincent promised. "Even when we're teenagers, and probably really annoying?" Emma asked with a small smile. Vincent laughed, the sound rich with love and joy and the promise of all the years ahead. Especially then. Emma threw her arms around his neck, and Tommy and Sarah quickly joined the hug. As Vincent held his children, because that's what they were now, legally and emotionally and in every way that mattered, he thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago. Successful but empty. Rich but poor in all the ways that counted. These children had saved him just as much as he'd saved them. Tomorrow, a judge will make their family official. But Vincent already knew the truth that no court document could capture. They'd been a family from the moment Emma had trusted him enough to ask for help. Everything else was just paperwork. The confrontation with David has ended, but it's brought this unlikely family closer together than ever. Vincent has proven that being a father isn't about biology. It's about love, commitment, and showing up when it matters most. But there's still one more chapter to this incredible story, and the ending will leave you with tears of joy. Make sure you're subscribed, because the conclusion is going to be absolutely beautiful. 1 year later, Vincent stood in the kitchen of their home, no longer his penthouse, but truly their home, watching Emma pack lunch for herself and her siblings. She moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been doing this for months, but there was something different about her now, something lighter. She was humming. It was such a simple thing, but it stopped Vincent in his tracks. When was the last time he'd heard Emma hum? When was the last time she'd done anything just because it brought her joy, rather than because it needed to be done? Turkey and cheese, cut diagonally, she announced, holding up Tommy's sandwich with mock seriousness. Bendy straw juice box, apple slices with lemon juice, and she paused dramatically. Homemade chocolate chip cookies, courtesy of Sarah Connor's secret recipe. Those are MY cookies, 6-year-old Tommy protested, though he was grinning. You can't just give them away. I made extra, Emma laughed, ruffling his hair. Besides, sharing is caring, remember? Vincent smiled as he watched the exchange. Tommy had grown so much in the past year. Not just physically, though he'd shot up 3 inches, but emotionally. The angry, confused little boy who destroyed Vincent's living room had transformed into a typical 6-year-old who still had his moments, but no longer carried the weight of the world on his small shoulders. Vincent, Sarah called from the living room, where she was supposed to be putting on her shoes. I can't find Mr. Hoppy. Mr. Hoppy was the stuffed rabbit that had been Sarah's constant companion since before her mother died. Losing him was still a crisis of epic proportions, though thankfully these crises were becoming less frequent. Check under the couch cushions, Vincent called back, not even looking up from his coffee. That's where he was yesterday. Found him. Sarah's voice was triumphant. He was having an adventure. Vincent chuckled. At 5 years old, Sarah had developed an elaborate fantasy life where her stuffed animals went on adventures while she slept. It was a healthy way of processing her world, according to Dr. Martinez, the family therapist who become an integral part of their lives. Dad, Emma said, and Vincent's heart still skipped a beat every time she called him that. Don't forget you have the parent-teacher conference today at 3 p.m. Already on my calendar, Vincent replied, holding up his phone. Mrs. Rodriguez wants to discuss your application for the gifted program. Emma's face lit up. Do you think I'll get in? I think, Vincent said, pulling her into a quick hug, that you're the smartest, most capable kid I know, and any program will be lucky to have you. It was true. Emma's grades had improved dramatically once she'd been able to focus on being a student instead of a surrogate parent. She was reading at a high school level, excelling in math, and had recently started a peer tutoring program for younger students. But more importantly, she was finally getting to be 9 years old. Okay, troops, Sarah Connor announced, entering the kitchen with her usual morning energy. Backpacks, lunchboxes, and let's move out. We don't want to be late for the last day of school. Sarah had officially moved into the guest wing 8 months ago, and Vincent couldn't imagine their family without her. She'd become more than just a live-in support specialist. She was Emma's confidant, Tommy's homework helper, little Sarah's story reader, and Vincent's partner in the beautiful chaos of raising 3 children. She was also, if Vincent was being honest with himself, something more than that. Something he was still figuring out how to name. I can't believe summer vacation starts today, Tommy said, bouncing with excitement. Are we really going to Disneyland? We really are, Vincent confirmed. 2 weeks in California, just the 5 of us. 6, Sarah corrected with a smile. Don't forget about Mr. Hoppy. He's very excited about Space Mountain. As they gathered their things and prepared to leave for school, Vincent marveled at how normal this all felt. A year ago, he'd been a man who ate breakfast alone in silence, reading financial reports while his coffee grew cold. Now his mornings were filled with the controlled chaos of family life. Lost homework, forgotten permission slips, arguments over who got the last of the good cereal. He wouldn't trade it for anything. Vincent, Emma said quietly as they waited for the elevator. Can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever miss it? Your old life. When everything was quiet and organized, and you didn't have to worry about anyone but yourself? It was a question she'd asked variations of before, usually when she was feeling insecure about the changes her presence had brought to his life. Vincent had learned to answer it honestly, because Emma could spot a lie from a mile away. Sometimes, he said, sometimes I miss being able to work late without worrying about missing dinner. Sometimes I miss having a living room that stays clean for more than 5 minutes. Emma's face fell slightly, and Vincent quickly continued. But you know what I don't miss? I don't miss eating dinner alone. I don't miss coming home to an empty house. I don't miss having no one to share good news with, or bad news, or just the ordinary moments that make up a life. He squeezed her hand. I don't miss being successful, but not happy. I don't miss having everything I thought I wanted and realizing it wasn't enough. So you're happy? Emma asked. Really happy? Vincent looked around at his family. Tommy chattering excitedly about summer plans. Sarah making Mr. Hoppy walk along the elevator wall. Sarah Connor organizing everyone's schedules with the efficiency of a military commander. And Emma herself, this incredible little girl who'd save his life by letting him save hers. I'm happier than I ever thought possible, he said truthfully. The school pickup that afternoon brought a surprise that made Vincent's chest tight with emotion. As the children ran toward the car, chattering about their last day and summer plans, Emma suddenly stopped and pulled a folded piece of paper from her backpack. I wrote something, she said, her voice suddenly shy. For you. For all of us, really. Vincent took the paper with hands that weren't quite steady. Emma's handwriting had improved dramatically over the past year, but he could still see traces of the careful, precise letters she'd used in that first letter to her mother. Dear family, today is day 365 since Vincent became our dad. I stopped counting the days since Mommy went to heaven because Dr. Martinez says it's okay to stop counting sad things and start counting happy things instead. I want to tell you about the things I've learned this year. I learned that families aren't just people who look like you. They're people who choose to love you even when you're scared or angry or difficult. I learned that it's okay to let other people take care of you sometimes. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you loved. I learned that Tommy's tantrums aren't scary when there's a grown-up who knows how to handle them, and that Sarah's nightmares go away faster when she has two people to comfort her instead of just me. I learned that Vincent burns pancakes but makes the best bedtime stories. That Sarah Connor gives the best hugs and always knows when someone needs cookies. That our family is loud and messy and sometimes crazy, but it's ours. Most importantly, I learned that Mommy was right. Love isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up. And our family shows up for each other every single day. I think Mommy would like our family. I think she'd be happy that Tommy laughs more than he cries now, and that Sarah talks about her dreams instead of just her nightmares, and that I get to be a kid instead of a grown-up. I think she'd like Vincent too. I think she'd thank him for keeping us together when everyone else wanted to split us apart. Tomorrow we start summer vacation, and I'm excited instead of worried. That's new for me, being excited about the future instead of scared of it. Thank you for being my family. Thank you for choosing us. Thank you for showing me that sometimes the best things in life are the ones you never saw coming. Love forever and always. Emma. P.S. I still write letters to Mommy sometimes, but now they're happy letters. I tell her about our adventures and how much we love each other. I think that makes her smile in heaven. Vincent had to stop reading twice to wipe his eyes. When he finished, he looked up to find his entire family watching him with expressions of love and hope, and the kind of joy that comes from knowing you're exactly where you belong. Emma, he said, his voice rough with emotion, this is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever written. It's true, she said simply. Every word. Group hug, Sarah announced, and suddenly Vincent found himself surrounded by his children, their arms wrapped around him, and each other in a tangle of love and laughter. Over their heads, his eyes met Sarah Connor's, and he saw his own emotions reflected there, the wonder of unexpected love, the gratitude for second chances, the joy of a family that had been built from broken pieces and somehow became stronger than anything that had come before. I love you guys, Vincent said, and the words felt like a prayer, a promise, and a celebration all at once. We love you too, Dad, Emma said, and in that moment, Vincent knew that every choice he'd made, every mistake he'd learned from, every moment of doubt and fear and overwhelming love had led him exactly where he was supposed to be. 6 months later, Vincent stood in a courthouse that looked nothing like the one where his own fate had been decided 30 years earlier. This courtroom was filled with sunlight and hope, and the kind of joy that comes from making something official that had been true in every way that mattered for over a year. Do you, Vincent Michael Corleone, promise to love, protect, and provide for Emma Rose Watson, Thomas James Watson, and Sarah Elizabeth Watson as their legal father, in sickness and in health, in good times and challenging times, for as long as you all shall live? I do, Vincent said, his voice strong and sure. And do you, Emma, Tommy, and Sarah, accept Vincent Corleone as your legal father, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails? We do, Emma said, speaking for all three of them with the confidence of someone who'd never been more certain of anything in her life. Then by the power vested in me by the state, I hereby grant this petition for adoption. Vincent, meet your children. Emma, Tommy, and Sarah, meet your father. Congratulations to the Corleone family. The gavel came down, and Vincent felt something shift in his chest, something that had been broken for 30 years, finally clicking into place. He was no longer Vincent Corleone, a successful businessman. He was Vincent Corleone, father of 3 incredible children who taught him that the best things in life couldn't be bought, only earned through love and commitment, and showing up every single day. As his family surrounded him with hugs and tears and laughter, Vincent thought about the man he'd been 18 months ago. That man had thought he had everything: money, power, success, respect. But he'd been wrong. He'd had nothing. Now he had everything that mattered. Dad, Emma said, tugging on his sleeve. Can we go home now? Sarah Connor promised to make celebration pancakes, and I want to call Mrs. Rodriguez and tell her the good news. Of course, Vincent said, scooping little Sarah into his arms while Tommy grabbed his hand. Let's go home. As they walked out of the courthouse together, the Corleone family, official and legal and bound by love rather than just hope, Vincent felt a peace he'd never known was possible. He'd started this journey trying to save 3 children. Instead, they'd saved him. And that, Vincent thought as Emma skipped ahead while chattering about summer plans and Tommy peppered him with questions about whether they could get a dog now that they were really family, was the most beautiful plot twist of all. Sometimes the best families aren't the ones you're born into. Sometimes they're the ones you choose. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they choose you back. And there you have it, a story about love, family, and the incredible power of choosing to show up for the people who matter most. Vincent's journey from isolated businessman to devoted father reminds us that it's never too late to change your life, and that sometimes the most unexpected encounters can lead to the most beautiful transformations. What did you think of this incredible journey? Have you ever had a moment that completely changed the direction of your life? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, please hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who might need to hear this message of hope and second chances. Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey. Until next time, remember that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about love, choice, and the courage to open your heart to unexpected possibilities.